Chapter 2377 Shadow 1. The Black Knight stood like an iron tower in the middle of the road, his scarlet eyes piercing through his mask and landing on Zhang Yi. He raised the black cross-shaped greatsword, pointing it coldly at the two people and the dog who had arrived. That gaze was devoid of any emotion, containing only an unchanging coldness and deathly stillness. Outsiders, a deep, hoarse voice, like the grinding of rocks, came from beneath the helmet, echoing strangely. "Where do you come from?" This was the first time in his life that he had seen humans from Earth, and he was extremely curious. Zhang Yi stared at him and simply said, "Earth." He spoke succinctly, while secretly assessing the strength of the other party's aura. It was no weaker than the mad owl he had encountered before, giving him a very strong sense of pressure. "Earth." Inghui repeated the word, his scarlet eyes seeming to flicker for a moment. "That's a corner I've never reached. But no matter where you come from, once you enter the Dark Sun Forest, there's no turning back." "What do you mean?" Zhang Yi frowned. "Your lives and your strength are the source that sustains this forest and nourishes our existence." Inghui's voice was completely calm, as if he were stating a perfectly natural fact. To give up everything and merge into eternal silence is your only destiny. Past, present, and future, all intruders will suffer the same fate. Zhang Yi felt a chill run down his spine. The other person's words confirmed some of his previous guesses. This forest was indeed drawing on the intruder's life force to maintain some kind of balance. Or rather, it supports ancient beings like Inghui. "It seems there's no point in talking." Zhang Yi sighed, but his eyes suddenly sharpened. A fighting spirit surged within him. He had become even stronger. After killing Mad Owl, he realized that he now possessed the ability to fight against opponents of the White Knight level. At this moment, he really wanted to try and see if he could kill the Black Sword Knight in front of him with his own abilities. The timing and the people are both on Zhang Yi's side. Although his ability index exceeds 50,000 points, Zhang Yi has the upper hand in terms of intelligence. Unlike Xinlu, Inghui lacked the support of the entire nation's resources, and coupled with his moral decay, his combat effectiveness did not reach Zhenglu's level. Therefore, a battle is possible. "Brian, Xian, you two stay on the sidelines and keep watch for me. I want to see how strong I am now. Be prepared to strike. If I find myself at a disadvantage, don't hesitate. Launch an attack immediately." "Okay, bro, watch out. This guy feels even harder than the last one." Although Brian was worried, he obediently retreated to a safe distance, baring his teeth and trying to look fierce as he stared intently at Inghui. Yang Xinxin didn't speak, but nodded slightly. Her figure silently blended into the shadows beside her. The causal threads of the fallen puppet were faintly visible, ready to provide support at any time. Zhang Yi took a step forward, and the space around him began to distort slightly. The myriad phenomena of the universe, 3,000 dimensional gates surrounding him, formed an absolute defense that was difficult to break through. Next, he used his strongest power without holding back at all. The core furnace of the demon god armor ignited, turning the originally black armor a fiery red in an instant, with scorching white smoke billowing up. With a thought, a giant, ice-blue sword appeared out of thin air in his hand, the sword of judgment and eternity. The moment the sword appeared, the surrounding temperature plummeted, and even the air seemed to freeze. The eternal judgment sword was encased in his divine forging. Even though the divine refinement weapon looks like a tough weapon forged from a single piece, it is actually based on the tree sword of bows and is a weapon made of multiple fibers, which can be both flexible and strong. Infinite sword domain. Zhang Yi let out a low shout, gripped his sword with both hands, and fiercely plunged it into the ground beneath his feet. Clang! A clear, resonant sword cry echoed through the mountain path. Centered on the point where the sword tip landed, an icy blue halo instantly spread out, covering an area of several thousand meters in radius. Countless translucent, ice-blue sword blades condensed and floated in the air, slowly rotating to form a huge, gladiator-like tower made of swords, sealing Zhang Yi and Ing Hui inside. Within the sword domain, space solidified, and the flow of time became abnormal. Ing Hui's crimson eyes swept across the surrounding sword domain, revealing a slight fluctuation for the first time. It was not fear, but a long-lost fighting spirit. An interesting area? Just fun? That's not enough. Zhang Yi smiled faintly, and in the next instant, countless ice-blue giant swords rained down from the towering sword tower, densely shooting towards Ing Hui's body. The second hand of time can predict all its movements within the next 5 seconds. Although the opponent's actions would constantly change within 5 seconds, that was enough for him to use his sword to block all of Ing Hui's evasions to the maximum extent. An astonishing sword aura formed a deadly cage that completely surrounded Ing Hui. Before the sword even fell, the terrifying storm of supernatural power had already turned the entire endless sword domain into a scene of utter desolation. Ing Hui knew that he had no chance of escaping this dense attack. Therefore, he made the right choice. Offense instead of defense. Ing Hui's sword moved. His massive body unleashed astonishing speed that belied his size, and his enormous cross-shaped sword swept out in all directions with a single, direct strike, carrying the power to tear everything apart. Blade Storm. Shadow's ability is to control the wind. His sword stirred up an endless, vast wind. The blade was black, and the wind it blew was also black. He seemed to transform into the eye of a typhoon, with a black storm of blades swirling wildly around him before rapidly expanding outwards. The massive storm, with each wind blade a sword, expanded rapidly and instantly collided fiercely with Zhang Yi's billions of supernatural longswords. It was the purest collision of power, an endless collision between the icy blue longsword and the black sword storm, annihilating each other. Before the sword even arrived, its sharp aura had already carved a deep mark on the ground. Zhang Yi's pupils contracted slightly. On the tactical goggles, the opponent's ability index was clearly displayed, 51,000 points. He was a full 6,000 points higher than him. The huge energy difference brought about absolute power suppression. That's how it usually is, but Zhang Yi in front of him was clearly an exception. Zhang Yi's mind raced, his figure blurring instantly as he used his spatial teleportation ability to narrowly avoid the earth-shattering attack. The ground where they were standing was cleaved open by the sword energy, creating a trench thousands of meters long. The surrounding black, twisted mountain peaks were blasted into dust. Chapter 23 78 Shadows 2. With a sweeping cross-shaped sword, Zhang Yi didn't rush to retaliate, but instead silently dodged repeatedly. Deep within his left eye, the phantom of an ancient pendulum quietly emerged, the second hand of time activated. In an instant, Zhang Yi's perception surpassed the normal flow of time. He saw countless possibilities in the next few seconds, Shadow's next slash, thrust, and the impending, terrifying storm of blades, as typhoon-like as it was about to erupt. In the scene foreseen by the second hand of time, Ing Hui gripped his sword with both hands and began to spin rapidly. Countless sharp sword energies would form a devastating death storm centered on him. This was his ability, Blade Storm. 5 seconds is enough to have a huge impact on a duel between top-level players. At least for now, Zhang Yi can clearly judge the opponent's attack power level and his ability characteristics. Wind and sword possess the powerful ability to attack indiscriminately over a wide area, and by utilizing the tearing power of the storm, they can also create the strongest point-to-point killing power in the central area. It seems like a very simple ability, but it has been developed in a very ingenious way. Night-level guys are all monsters. If external factors are disregarded, Ing Hui's abilities are sufficient to fight Zheng Lu one-on-one to the death. In reality, Ing Hui's movements were synchronized with the premonition. He indeed began to spin, and terrifying sword pressure began to gather. Would Zhang Yi let him have his way? The attacks of Blade Storm become stronger as the storm takes shape. Therefore, the best way to deal with it is to shatter the Blade Storm the moment he makes his move. Let's test my current attack power. A dark vortex formed behind Zhang Yi, and he realized that it was the most primordial energy of the universe. Dark energy surged forth like a tidal wave, converging on the eternal judgment sword in Zhang Yi's hand. Drifting in the dark realm, he gripped the sword of judgment tightly with one hand, frantically injecting the newly comprehended dark matter energy originating from this universe into the sword. The originally icy blue sword was instantly shrouded in deep darkness, as if it had transformed into a black hole that devoured everything. He unleashed a simple yet powerful sword strike towards the heart of the storm that was about to form from the shadows. There was no earth-shattering explosion, only an extreme annihilation. A deep darkness surged forth from the tip of the sword, like the Styx bursting its banks. The sword's movements were fluid and expressive, and the outpouring of antimatter energy resembled a giant black moon streaking across the sky. From being completely ignorant of the power to having a clear understanding of the source of the dark power, Zhang Yi was able to better control this energy and unleash its power. This force collided with a newly formed destructive storm composed of countless sword energies. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The collision between the dark crescent moon and the sword energy produced a piercing, shattering sound. The blade storm, using wind attribute alien energy as its material, formed billions of enormous spiral blades that fiercely slashed at Zhang Yi's black crescent moon. Wherever dark matter passes, the dazzling yet dangerous storm of sword energy is like metal thrown into strong acid, quickly decomposed, dissolved, and annihilated. This is not a consumption of energy, but an erasure at the level of rules. Zhang Yi had already grasped the essence of this power. It does not belong to any form of power in the apparent universe, but originates from this universe. Therefore, no force can restrain it. Conversely, it can also be said that it can overwhelm and negate everything in this world. The spinning figure of Inghui suddenly stopped, and for the first time, an expression of disbelief appeared in her scarlet eyes. His storm of swords was forcibly nipped in the bud in a way he couldn't understand. This power, Lord Samuel, the power of a god. How could you possibly obtain the power of a god? He growled, his voice filled with utter shock. Only the gods possess a power that does not belong to this world. But he actually saw it in 6 generations of people. Zhang Yi naturally didn't answer. He seized the moment when the other party was stunned, and his figure shot out. The sword of judgment transformed into streaks of dark lightning, launching a fierce counterattack. It is impolite not to reciprocate. This time, I'll let you taste the sharpness of my sword. Zhang Yi made a slash from a distance. His swordsmanship was already comparable to Liang Yu's. However, this kind of long-range confrontation depends solely on who has a deeper understanding of the alien energy and whose abilities are better able to restrain the other. Inghui quickly regained his composure and swung his cross-shaped sword. Although the two were thousands of meters apart, it was only a distance that the two could reach in an instant with a single strike. With a single sword strike, a storm descended from the void, sweeping across the land. If it weren't within Zhang Yi's endless sword domain, this ever-spreading storm could easily destroy a city spanning hundreds of kilometers. Darkness, immense size, spiraling, expanding, a single strike, combining offense and defense, formed the entirety of this world. A storm of dark sword blades, almost reaching the sky, rolled and crushed towards Zhang Yi. On the opposite side, the dark matter flowing from the dark realm also blotted out the sky, as if ink had been splashed and blackened a large area of space. Yang Xinxin and Brian had already run a long distance away. Seeing the scene, Brian's tongue lolled out. Damn it, is this the combat power of a knight? I feel like I have no chance to intervene at all. Just watch quietly. Yang Xinxin's gaze turned solemn as she spoke in a deep voice. Behind her, a fallen golem appeared, longbow and arrows in hand, ready to support Zhang Yi at any moment. The clanging of metal against metal rang out like a sudden downpour, each collision unleashing dazzling sparks and terrifying energy shocks that shook the entire sword domain. In an instant, the two engaged in a terrifying battle across the distance within the arena made of sword blades. Sword light flashed, darkness surged, and sword energy collided and annihilated with dark matter energy. With the help of the second hand of time's prediction and the unpredictable flow of the dark realm, Zhang Yi repeatedly avoided fatal attacks and looked for opportunities to counterattack. Ying Hui, relying on his absolute strength advantage and honed combat skills, steadily and surely neutralized most of Zhang Yi's attacks. The two fought from the sky to the ground, and then from the ground back to the sky. Wherever it passed, the black rocks were flattened by the sword energy, and huge pits were corroded by dark matter. In the blink of an eye, the two sides had exchanged more than 1,000 blows, making it impossible to determine a winner. Once you enter their field, who isn't a highly experienced fighter, adept at both offense and defense and virtually without any weaknesses? The two of them, without prior agreement, did not choose the most powerful close-quarters combat. At this moment, they must be patient. Any psychological weakness could lead to their immediate defeat by their opponent. Chapter 23, 79 Shadows 3. Within the arena composed of endless ice-blue sword blades, time seemed to stretch out. The confrontation between Zhang Yi and Ying Hui had been going on for an unknown period of time, with countless collisions filling the air with an atmosphere of tension and destruction. The battle between the two white knight-level superhumans took place in this area covered by the oppressive aura of the demon god. Otherwise, in another location, the surrounding area would have long been barren. The antimatter flowing through the dark realm can devour everything, including the Shadow's incredibly powerful and massive sword storm. One force can overcome all methods. Shadow's attack method is very simple, but Storm is always omnipresent and integrates offense and defense, so for a while Zhang Yi could not find a good way to break through. But Zhang Yi wasn't in a hurry. He was an extremely patient hunter. Ying Hui's body, covered in heavy armor, undulated slightly, and the crimson light beneath his mask flickered erratically. He gripped the massive cross-shaped sword in his hand, his heart surging with unprecedented turmoil. This young man from Earth, whose superpower index was clearly far lower than his, was like a slippery fish, whose every attack seemed to be anticipated by his opponent, allowing him to dodge or block it precisely. His signature earth-shattering strikes often only managed to shatter the afterimages left by Zhang Yi, or were quietly annihilated by the eerie dark energy. Am I really getting old? An unprecedented thought, like a venomous snake, burrowed into Ying Hui's ancient mind. Has it been sleeping in this forgotten corner for too long that it can't even easily defeat a junior?
No.
Is it because this forest has absorbed too much power? Or has such a terrifying monster been born in this era? His pride wouldn't allow him to admit weakness, but the frustration of a prolonged stalemate and a barely perceptible sense of powerlessness were quietly eroding his fighting spirit. In contrast, Zhang Yi, though his breathing was also slightly rapid, still maintained a calm and icy gaze. The myriad forces surrounding him acted like the most loyal bulwark, completely blocking the aftershocks of Shadow's attack. The illusory image of the second hand in his left eye slowly shifted, revealing countless possibilities for the next 5 seconds. Unable to break through the opponent's sword storm? What's the rush? Every living thing has its weaknesses. He's probably the only exception. Standing in an invincible position of absolute defense and foresight, Zhang Yi calmly observed his opponent, analyzed every detail of the opponent's power operation, and searched for that fleeting flaw that even Ying Hui himself might not have noticed. The disparity in strength is an objective fact, but the outcome of a battle is never just a contest of data. Zhang Yi silently thought to himself, the Shadow Sword is full of destruction and violence, but it lacks a touch of agility, a touch of resolute determination to seek change in desperate situations. He was bound by his own power and his past. Having been sealed in the dark sun forest for nearly 1,000 years, his spiritual world had decayed, and his movements had become sluggish due to his infrequent sword practice. Ying Hui, you've grown old. Ha! The frustration of the prolonged battle finally caused Ying Hui to gradually lose patience. He had never felt so uncomfortable before. It was as if his opponent had anticipated every single one of his attacks. No matter how he tried, he couldn't catch up with his opponent. With spatial teleportation, he can freely travel within a range of 4,500 meters at a time. As long as he avoids the Eye of the Storm, which is the most powerful attack of his sword Storm, Shadow cannot break through Zhang Yi's defense at all. Despite possessing greater attack power and 1,000 years of combat experience, he was still easily evaded by his opponent's attacks time and time again. This feeling made Yinghui angry. He could not tolerate his dignity being challenged. Yinghui let out a roar that shook the mountains, and a massive amount of dark energy surged out of his body like a volcanic eruption. He raised the massive cross-shaped sword high with both hands, the blade trembling violently and emitting a piercing hum, as if it could not withstand the immense power. Blade of Shadow destroys heaven and earth. He roared and plunged his cross-shaped sword into the ground beneath his feet. No, not just plunged, but rather pierced the framework of reality with the power of destruction. Rumble. The entire infinite sword domain trembled violently, as if it might collapse at any moment. Centered on Yinghui, an unprecedented and more violent storm of swords was born. This is not a horizontal tornado, but rather a black sphere that is constantly expanding and composed of countless physical sword shadows and destructive energy. On the surface of the sphere, countless blades spun and cut wildly, emitting a shriek powerful enough to tear apart the soul. Wherever they passed, space was ripped open with fine black marks, as if even nothingness itself was about to be shredded into pieces. This is Yinghui's ultimate strike, a desperate attempt to wipe Zhang Yi and his sword domain from the world. A terrifying storm of sword blades instantly surrounded Zhang Yi. The vast, endless sword domain was shaken to the point of collapse by the powerful sword pressure. Zhang Yi was fast enough, but even his spatial traversal could not prevent him from being enveloped by the rapidly expanding sword storm. This old bastard is starting to fight me to the death. Zhang Yi was forced all the way to the edge of the endless sword domain, where he had nowhere to escape. However, there was no trace of fear in his eyes. That's exactly what I've been waiting for. The 3,000 dimensional gates surrounding Zhang Yi suddenly contracted, encircling him in layers. The most powerful defensive capability known to exist in this world has been fully unleashed by Zhang Yi. In an instant, the terrifying, enormous black sword storm connected heaven and earth, crushing down and colliding fiercely with all things in the universe. The layers upon layers of dimensional gates constructed from all things in the universe, for the first time, let out a mournful cry of being overwhelmed by this ultimate destructive power.
Click, click, click.
A series of sounds, like glass shattering, rang out. The outermost dozens or even hundreds of dimensional gates turned to dust the moment they came into contact with the storm of sword blades. The storm continued its relentless advance, tearing apart and annihilating spatial barriers one after another. Inside the shadow space, everyone watched with trepidation. Fatty Sue's face turned pale, Uncle Yu clenched his fists, and Zhou Kuo covered her mouth. They could clearly see that Zhang Yi's defenses were being rapidly depleted. One dimensional gate after another shattered, swirling in the air like crystal shards, creating a distorted, shimmering light. Finally, as the destructive storm's energy gradually dissipated and subsided, Zhang Yi's figure reappeared. The aura of myriad phenomena surrounding him had dimmed considerably. According to the rapid statistics from the internal system, a full tenth of his dimensional gates had been destroyed in that single attack. Dear viewers, thanks for staying with me. We'll try to get you more updates. Please like and subscribe and share the video with your friends. Love you all.